Hello and welcome to Stuff Every Queer Kid Should Know, the survival guide for late adolescents and also Eagle River, Alaska. I'm Max Emerson, a writer and performer leveraging social media to create independent narratives. Similar to my other endeavors, this podcast is designed to provide vital resources, role models, and tools that enhance your well-being, foster connections, and support personal growth from late adolescence and beyond. Up to middle age at this point. That's where we're at now. Welcome. Today, we're going to be politicking with Brian Sims. Welcome.
Thank you. Late middle age, how old are you?
I'm 36.
All right. I don't know that that's late middle age. You're likely
I didn't
to
say
see
late middle age. I said middle age. Up to middle aged.
All right.
That's the start of middle age.
It feels like you're in like the first third still to me.
Well, I've had the motorcycle for a long time. So I think like the interests were there. You know, like the crisis has been long standing.
Competing forces. Okay.
Brian Sims is a civil rights advocate, former Pennsylvania state legislator, and current CEO of Agenda PAC, a super PAC focused on defeating, not defending, anti-equality officials. He made history in 2011 as the first openly queer member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. He has lectured globally on diversity, queer civil rights, and public policy, and has held leadership roles in various organizations, including Out Leadership at the Philadelphia Bar Association. A passionate advocate for reproductive rights, he has received numerous accolades. Don't mind Sarge knocking over my microphone. He has received numerous accolades. It's a running gag on this show, Brian. Don't worry about it. It happens every time.
This was his favorite part.
Yeah, it's his way of getting airtime. A passionate advocate for reproductive rights, he has received numerous accolades, including being named one of the Out 100's most influential LGBTQ plus Americans. It's a big deal. One of those. Influenza. Sims is also a trailblazer in sports, being the only NCAA football captain to come out publicly while still active. He continues to serve on multiple nonprofit boards and advises organizations advancing LGBTQ plus equality. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. I know you had the Out 100 party last night.
I did.
So I'm honored that you were able to drag yourself all the way over to the west side.
No. I'm too old to go to after parties, and so I'm just old enough to have gotten up in time to, be fully refreshed for a day like this. Thank you for having me.
Oh, how responsible. I'm glad that I could provide the impetus for good habits. I have compiled a list of rapid fire questions for this audience to get to know you better in a section called Who the Hell Are You? Ready?
I'm ready.
Name?
Brian Sims.
Zodiac sign?
I'm a Virgo.
What are you an expert in?
I'm an expert in LGBTQ civil rights, women's and reproductive rights, and racial and ethnic justice.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
How do you identify on the gender and sexuality spectrum today?
I'm gay.
Just gay.
Just gay.
Just gay. What is your most favorite animal?
My most favorite animal is a Newfoundland dog.
Least favorite animal?
My least favorite animal is any kind of spider.
Oh, you would hate this house. What's the last thing you ate?
I'm sorry, I'm thinking about your house. The last thing I ate was a poke bowl.
Beautiful. How many caffeinated drinks do you drink per day?
You know, I actually didn't even start drinking coffee until just a couple of years ago. My partner is, as he likes to say, violently addicted to coffee, and it has sort of, I guess, bled into my life. Maybe 2 cups of coffee a day.
Is that your caffeinated beverage of choice?
Yeah.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is people who speak on or use their phones on speaker in public.
Dream vacation destination?
Nepal.
Favorite sport or game?
Favorite sport or game? I really do. We're going to talk about this probably later. I loved high school football.
Football. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a virtual hellscape and 10 being a glorious utopia, how are things looking for queer people in America right now?
It's somewhere between a 2 and a 4.
Okay. Not looking good.
Not looking good at all.
What's your favorite thing about queer bars?
That they give permission to the right kind of people to sort of get out of their shell and not be so hung up on their masculinity or their femininity or sort of whether they are or are not attractive, and just get to be with other people that want to be with them.
Nice. My producers are signaling me the number you were looking for was 3, between 2 and 4, for how things are looking for queer people in America today.
I've heard of that number.
What is the last item you misplaced?
Probably my phone.
Where was it?
It was on the counter where it belonged.
Beautiful. What was the last thing that you were super mad about?
The last thing I was super mad about was the election.
What's the last thing that made you cry?
The election.
What's the location of the worst date that you've ever been on?
Part of it was at his parents' home. He brought me to his parents' house. I thought to meet them, it was to ask them for money for the date that he was taking me on, and they were hosting a like religious gathering in their home. And I walked in. This was I was in law school, and I had asked this guy out, and he was like, "Oh, I was going to swing by my parents' house. They live in East Lansing," and we walked into a religious gathering, and he asked his mom and dad for money for the date we were about to go on.
Did they make you work for it?
No,
Oh. Then it would have been the best date you've ever been on.
it's a whole different story.
Wow. What is your most prized possession? Don't mind the dog.
My most prized possession, I'm wearing it. The wedding band that I proposed to my partner with, I'm actually wearing because it fits me, was my grandfather's wedding band, and my dad sent it to me and asked me if I would propose with it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really cool coming from an old military man.
Right? Yeah, it made me cry.
That's amazing. So you survived the rapid fire questions. We're going to move on to some more personal issues here.
Oh, good.
Here are my top 5 tips for slow travel, brought to you by the viral home swapping app, Kindred. Traveling is extra stressful when you don't get to do your usual routines. On Kindred, we got to stay at Melody's home for 12 days for under $500. Reduce travel fatigue and actually get to know your destination by booking accommodation for at least a week. Instead of overpaying for vacation rentals and hotels, I use Kindred to pick up and explore destinations conveniently and affordably by swapping with fellow community members. The spaces have things that vacation-only properties don't, like real plants, unique art, and actually functioning kitchen, and all those other little things that make me feel at home. Staying in a walkable neighborhood usually means you get a smaller space, but the upsides are endless. You save money on transportation, and you feel more connected to your host city. This month, we're in Hawaii, which is famous for being super expensive. The trick is to eat and drink local. Our hosts were excited to share their favorite parts of Oahu and even had a full quiver of surfboards for us to use. I've been gone for almost a month, and thanks to Kindred, I'm in no rush to get back. Hair products have come a long way. You can get real results with a solution that's both effective and leaves your hair and scalp looking healthier than ever. I'm talking about Scandinavian Biolab's Biopilixin. That's plant-powered, drug-free formula that's also clinically tested, which is rare. The plant growth factors in Biopilixin help to extend the hair's growth phase, which is key to keeping your locks. It also helps increase blood flow to your scalp and help extend the follicles for thicker, more resilient strands. Scandinavian Biolabs recommends starting with their 3-step hair activation routine. This includes a hair strengthening shampoo, a hair recovery conditioner, and an activation serum. You just shampoo and condition as usual and then massage the serum into your scalp. Let the warming sensation do its thing and then style as usual. No greasiness, no flaking, no weird smells. Scandinavian Biolabs actually makes your hair look great and feel great while it's working. If you have short hair or don't use conditioner, just go with the 2-step process. You're still going to get the active ingredients. What's the proof? In a clinical trial, Biopilixin showed early results in about 45 days. 77% of users had a reduction in shedding at the 6-week mark. By 150 days, that went up to 93%, plus 73% had a measurable increase in hair density. With 0 drugs, you're not rolling the dice with your hormones when you use Biopilixin. Scandinavian Biolabs also takes the risk out of the investment. Their products are backed by a 150-day money-back guarantee. If you don't see results in 5 months, get a full refund. Start today with 20% off the hair activation routine and any other products from the Scandinavian Biolabs using code MAXEMERSON. Go to ScandinavianBiolabs.com. First and foremost, you made history as the first out LGBTQ plus member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Wow, congratulations.
Out is the operative word. There were, I like to joke that no building that has as much marble and gilding as that Capitol hadn't had queer people in it for all time.
PA in particular.
PA in particular. It's one of the 5 most beautiful capitals in the country. California, I think, has one of them as well.
And the aesthetics just kind of draws them in.
Truly, well, and they need us. But also, when I joined the legislature, there were over a dozen closeted elected officials in the just the General Assembly alone. I joke,
and of
but
course
it's true.
You had like access, like you knew who they all were.
I had been running Equality Pennsylvania, the state's advocacy organization, for a couple of years before, and so when you have a job like that, you learn really quickly who the poorly closeted legislators are. Every single state has them.
Poorly closeted.
Poorly closeted legislators, people who
They forget to shut it.
It's that combination of a power trip of being an elected official that often happens when they're in their own capitals. Those places are like Vegas to the wrong elected official. Everything gets covered for you. Everything is paid for. You think of yourself as a different caliber of person than all the people around you, and that makes you
Like the George Santos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really awful decisions. And so closeted legislators especially are often in their worst behavior in capital settings. And it was certainly true in Harrisburg.
Wow. I once accidentally made out with one of those, and like someone pulled me aside and you're like, you know who that is? And I was like, no. And they're like, that's...
And we won't play that game, but I bet I could figure out who
no,
it was.
we're not playing that game. Absolutely not. I'm in enough trouble as it is.
Yeah, and I want to issue like a...
And we're here to talk about
fatwa
you.
on them. Yeah, nobody should... Yeah, I mean, like, or at least on their penises, right? Like nobody should be hooking up with
like Lysistrata,
the
just
awful
a full sex
anti-LGBTQ closeted legislators. Yes.
Ooh, you could do like an adaptation of Lysistrata today. That's basically when women go on a sex strike in Greek mythology, but it's like the play where they're like running around with giant phalluses. It's a good time.
Yes.
Let's do it.
What I think is that from my experience, the number of closeted elected officials I have met who do really anti-LGBTQ things is more than the closeted elected officials I've met who are pro-LGBTQ.
Yep.
Listen, the closet
make the best villains in the closet.
The closet makes you do really, really crazy things, and everyone's entitled to their closet. And I think there's a big difference between not having come out yet and choosing to live a life in the closet because you, whether you tell yourself you're choosing your career and you can't be out and have that kind of a career. And that has certainly been completely true for a huge portion of our history, but I don't know that it is true right now. I was just in Kansas City, Missouri last week talking to the new minority leader in the Kansas General Assembly, who's an openly gay man. And if that can exist there, I really struggle with closeted elected officials in states where they have full equality and they've not been a part of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just had Chris Colfer on, and we were talking about it in the industry, in the film and TV industry, and how he had someone tell him, "Oh, you were amazing, but I can't cast a in this. Sorry," like to his face. But it's always the gay men. It's always us.
You know what? It's always been women, and it's always been people of color too. And there's not a single time I can think of where I have either been discriminated against or seen open discrimination in front of me that I can't recognize it hasn't happened to lots of other people before in lots of other ways. I just think that at the moment, kind of the way that Chris was talking about, where we don't allow white actors to play roles of color. We wouldn't, there are certain boundaries that we make sure we don't cross, but those often don't apply to queer people. And it's certainly something I saw in government.
Really?
Yeah. I in the same way that my women colleagues, for example, always had to use, or often had to use, the capital and like the clout of their own families, their bodies, their own personal experiences in order to make some awful legislator who's passing some awful sexist bill understand maybe that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Women are always tasked with having to use the sort of to pass empathy on to others. They have to tell these deeply personal stories of sexism and misogyny. And I saw it every day on the House floor. And my colleagues of color, every time a racist bill would come up, they have to stand up and in order to get somebody to empathize, they have to talk about things that certainly my white, my cis, my straight colleagues never had to pull from those same kinds of experiences or expose themselves in the same ways just to try to make somebody think a little differently. Yeah. And I'll tell you, every single time that anything LGBTQ ever came up on the House floor in my 10 years, it was usually my bill. And every single time I would, sit on the floor and really lay out in the most deeply personal ways I could why, this issue was going to impact, not just me and not just people around them, but people they might never know. And it sounds
exhausting to have to use those personal anecdotes every time. But isn't that kind of the rule of thumb with politics in the first place, is that numbers never convince anyone of anything? It's always story.
Yeah.
It's always personal anecdote and
very much.
Plumber Joe or whatever his name was.
And my colleagues were usually generally very scared of like 5 different types of people. They were scared of experts because most elected officials are generalists. They were scared of women because government and public policy is just always attacking women. Mm-hmm. They were scared of veterans because of the sort of the PR and the optics around veterans. Scared of children, again, because of the sort of the policy and the PR around kids and how you can use issues that you think relate to kids to pass really bad laws, like the bathroom bills and these sports bans, that kind of a thing.
The heartstring stuff.
Yeah. And they were often scared of people that were differently abled. Because no government is doing all that it can for people that are differently abled. And so when people that are differently abled were there lobbying, it was inherently something that they were probably right about and that we were wrong about.
And they'd just rather not address it at all as opposed to get criticized for not doing it well enough or whatever else.
Yep.
What were some of your challenges in your election? How did you approach this challenge?
I ran against a 28-year incumbent when I won my seat in the State House. She had been in office since I was 6 years old. I believe she was in her 70s. I hadn't lived in Philadelphia for most of this time period. I'd moved there after law school. And I was a board member at the LGBTQ Victory Fund. And there's this data point that we used to use all the time, and that is that no state that had ever passed any really comprehensive LGBTQ relationship recognition laws did it without first having an out legislator. That was the sort of proverbial first domino, the sort of glittery domino in a series of civil rights laws. And it's often not even that person. It's their existence in a legislature robs opponents of the ability to pretend that we don't exist. And so then, allies would start introducing bills and so on and so on. And my own state rep was the person that was largely tasked with sort of carrying the water on LGBTQ issues in the state house. And she was hated. She was just a nasty, mean liberal. And there are times in my life I've been a nasty, mean liberal, but I certainly wouldn't want it to have
like when they're
defined my
right about
career.
something, but their messaging is terrible.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
And I had worked with her on and off for a couple of years, and then she did a press conference on the Capitol steps that she was mad about a vote on, and she said, Republican women aren't even women; they're just men with breasts.
Oh.
And my mom at the time was a Republican woman.
That's going to win friends.
It's not even a line that was unique to her. She pulled that from like the suffrage movement. Like men said that about women in the 1920s when they were trying to get the right to vote. And that she had said it was really problematic, in part because there were Republican women in the House that we needed to be allies with her on a lot of our bills. And so I went and visited a guy that was a mentor of mine named David Mixner, a very famous founder of a number of LGBTQ organizations, and he'd worked in the White House. And he pretty much told me that I was the person that I had been looking for to fill that role. I'd been trying to run out people in the state for years and hadn't done it successfully.
I know that talk.
Right?
Hey, guess what? It's you.
It's you. And I didn't believe him. And then she said that. And I worked with a trans woman at the time who came into me and was as angry as I was. Like, how could this person that's supposed to be our ally say such a callous, such a heartless thing? And so
it's time.
It was time.
They're how old again?
Yeah, I mean, she was. And listen, some of my favorite colleagues were older colleagues, but they joined the legislature when I did. I don't mind a 60, a 70-year-old in office. In fact, I think there's so much that they can bring, but I don't want somebody who has spent 50 years in office. I went and met with her. I told her am I allowed to curse?
Please.
I went and met with her, and I told her I was going to. So Babette, the woman I ran against, was 5'2", 5'3" on a good day, and she had this really endearing quality about her. Everyone called her by her first name, but she was mean as piss. But I think that was one of the things people liked about her.
Okay.
And so I went to her office to tell her I was gonna run against her, and I didn't know at the time, but somebody in queer media had already ratted me out, and so she knew why I was there. She had a staff. I had to get buzzed into this office, and she had a staffer buzz me in. I said, "I'm here to speak with the representative," and Babette came around the corner, and she says, "Get the out in the hallway. We're not doing this in here." And I'm like, oh shit. I was like, all right, I'm doing this. So I walk out, and she walks out after me, and she slams the glass door behind me so hard I thought it was going to break. And she spins around and she looks up at me and she goes, "F this, we're not going to do it." And she goes to go back into her office, but she's locked out of the office in the same way that I was locked out. But that person was no longer at the desk to let her in. So she's just pounding on this glass door. And I leaned in next to her.
She just took all of her anger out on this glass door.
Furious. I mean, she's pounding it down by the doorknob, but furious. And I used the line I'd been practicing for days. And I said, "Representative, I'm going to run the largest, cleanest, healthiest race in the history of this district. I'm going to beat you because of it." And she told me to go myself.
Oh.
And I wandered over and I pressed the button on the elevator, and we were both there for the next 2 minutes, like her pounding on the door, me pressing the elevator button. And I did. It took me 10 months, about $250,000 in 10 months, and I beat her by 233 votes.
Whoa.
And I'll never forget the number. There were so many people in my life that got me 234 votes that the I've seen people win by very large numbers, and I've won by large numbers in
nothing.
subsequent races. And that's a different beast. But when you win by a small number, it means that virtually every person that worked with you, contributed to your race, that volunteered, is probably the reason that you won.
Stuff Every Queer Kid Should Know is brought to you by Max Emerson's Patreon. Do you ever feel like daily Instagram updates from your favorite influencers just aren't enough? Are you curious what the VIP section of social media is like? Well, buckle up, because Max Emerson's Patreon page is here to rescue you from the mundane. Get ready for exclusive access to Max's wild adventures, behind-the-scenes shenanigans, and a smorgasbord of engaging content that you won't find anywhere else. From sneak peeks to surprise gifts to mentions in the credits of videos and podcasts, Max's Patreon is the ultimate way to support independent queer storytelling. So what are you waiting for? Join today and let's make the internet a little more colorful, one Patreon pledge at a time. Patreon.com/Maxisms. I want to talk about this platform that you ran on, but I want to go back for a second to talk about the 2 minutes that you were waiting on the elevator. Did you pull out your phone?
I did not.
You just sat there?
I just sat there. And
Good for you.
She was furious. And so there's this thing they teach you in law school and debate about getting really calm when your opponent is getting really not calm.
Oh, my partner hates it when I do that.
Oh, everybody does, right?
Yeah.
And it happens to me all the time. I get frustrated and somebody gets really calm with me. I'm like, I know what you're doing. And it makes me more, frustrated. But I did it to her. And I knew I was going to be talking about the moment at some point to friends and to family and explaining it. And I didn't want to then somehow behave poorly because of her bad behavior. Mm-hmm. But I also,
what's the phrase about pigs? If you get down in the mud with a pig, you get dirty and the pig gets happy?
That. And like, you don't do that with a seasoned politician, right? No. You don't do that with somebody who's been in politics for 30 years. She'd had challengers every 2 years for 30 years and had beaten every single one of them. Like, there's a lot of arrogance that goes into thinking you can do something like this, or maybe ignorance.
Did she have a nickname?
No, because her name was Babette. It was just so easy to call her, hey, Babette.
So what was your campaign? How did you outline this? Because one of my most favorite fun facts is Harvey Milk not campaigning on gay rights, but on dog shit.
Yeah.
There's a beautification campaign. Is that kind of where you went with it?
I tell it when every campaign you have to have 3, 4, maybe 5 issues that define you from the person you are running against. And in my case, in Philadelphia, all of our races are primaries. There aren't enough Republicans to even have really serious general elections in most major cities. But it means that the primaries, one of the problems is that in theory those are people that agree with each other on the platform. And so you have to find places where you disagree or differentiate. And it can be a little harder in primaries. It wasn't in my case, but we also knew I did not need to have the conversation about being LGBTQ. Everyone knew I was gay, but she also chaired the LGBTQ caucus. She was she was the prime sponsor of a House bill called HB 300, which was the amendment to our Civil Rights Act to include LGBTQ people. Like she had all of the LGBTQ chops you could ever want in an elected official, and she represented the gayborhood of Philadelphia. And so she was relatively unimpeachable on queer issues. But I, as a gay man and as the former head of Equality Pennsylvania and as a civil rights person doing civil rights work, I sort of had I was relatively unimpeachable on those issues as well, which means that we didn't have to talk about them. We only did one debate. I don't know that it even came up in that debate. It was about everything else. It was about, spending on budgets. It was about, are we supporting schools? It was, it wasn't, do you believe in non-discrimination? It was, how are you going to accomplish this? How are you going to amend the Human Relations Act? How are you going to build consensus in committees? And I really got to differentiate myself from her on that.
I would hate to have to run a campaign strictly on, like, as a gay man, it's really nice to just be able to stick to the issues on these things.
And honestly, in my case, it was a huge privilege. Mm-hmm. The only way I got to run a race that wasn't defined by me being a queer man was because I was running in a major city that had a major gayborhood, that had elected officials that had already supported LGBTQ people. Like there were not out elected officials. And of course that was a big game changer. But had I run almost anywhere else, the headline would have just continued to be, gay civil rights, advocate, gay lawyer, gay whatever. That would have been it would have been that nonstop. And I see it in candidacies everywhere in the country. I work with candidates all over the place, and that can be a really complicated thing. It can also help. There is in many ways, a person's identity can give indication of what their life experiences have been like. Not always, but can give you an idea of how their decisions are formed, what experiences have led to them. When you find a candidate at this point in this place and time, like when I see a Black woman candidate running, for example, the things that I know about what she's had to overcome that a cis white male candidate would not have had to in that same setting teaches me a lot about the kind of fortitude I want from elected officials, the type of resilience I want to be able to, to sort of look at things that others have seen as insurmountable and still think that you can do it.
Yeah. You've almost immediately after, of course, getting all the press for being the first gay, launched right into more intersectional kind of endeavors. Can you speak to a little bit about that and why that was the direction you chose to go in? Because it seems like that's really just the second wave of gay rights at this point is standing up for each other and everybody else and finding solidarity. It's sort of a part of I think it's my background. It's how my family approaches diversity and adversity. But for me, when I got elected, I gathered up my constituents. I did a town hall meeting before I even took office. And as soon as we were in office, I had a meeting with the Philadelphia delegation to explain that I was going to try to do my job a little bit differently than it had been getting done before. Every single person introducing those bills that I was talking about earlier, that women had to stand up and talk about their bodies to oppose, or that my colleagues of color had to stand up and talk about their families to oppose, were introduced by people that looked just like me from across the room. Every single one of them. And it seemed like cowardice to me. My best friend who's gay.
Yeah, right? It made me mad that my Democratic colleagues were waiting for our Black colleagues to have to point out the racism in a Republican bill. It seemed like cowardice that we were requiring them to use their capital, them to dig deeply, into their own lives, where we couldn't stand up and say, this is my colleague, this is another person, and that made me very frustrated. And so I told my constituents that that's the opposite of what I was going to do, that I was going to be the person that would stand up and call a bill sexist, that I would point out how a bill could be racist. And people ask me all the time, how could a bill be sexist? The best example I'll give you is that when we were first passing medical marijuana in Pennsylvania, there was a list of 10 conditions that eventually were agreed to, that if you had any of these conditions, that you could qualify for a medical marijuana license. Now, of course, something like 6, maybe 7 of those happened significantly more in men than in women, but originally the list was probably 25, 30 conditions long, and almost exclusively the ones that only happen to women, like endometriosis, were completely stripped out of that bill. So a medical marijuana bill sounds fantastic. How can a bill be sexist? That's how a bill can be sexist. And so that's what I started doing my first term and my second term. And it did have a benefit that I hoped it would, and that is that it taught people a little bit about what allyship can look like on the House floor. And I've always thought that the best way to create an ally is to be an ally. Right. Show people that you care about their lives and their values and their families before you expect them to care about yours.
How do you navigate the line between being an ally and the criticism of being a white savior?
Yeah, I love the criticism. People should criticize every time you think that
you're saying. Have you had to find any balance with that and making sure that you're giving the platforms to the right people? Were there any kind of missteps or things that you would have done differently?
There is. There was a guy who ran for city council in Philadelphia years ago, a Latino scientist, who used to say, don't pretend to give a voice to the voiceless. Give them a microphone.
Yeah.
And there was a while in my early career where I thought, I'm getting all of this attention. The smartest thing I can do with this attention is to sort of try to aim it at the people
also Mr.
in the
Quarterback.
places. Well,
So
luckily I wasn't quarterback. I was the captain, not a quarterback. I can't throw.
Sorry, I don't know how
No, my
sports
partner
work.
will laugh if thinking I was accused of being a quarterback because I can't throw a football.
My bad.
No, yeah, Mr. Quarterback.
Sports.
Yeah, now you threw me with a sports reference.
Mr. Captain. But I mean, you're used to being very central and in a leadership position. So it sounds like you adapted when the conversation was changing and you listened. And
yeah, I don't know. I knew that asking my colleagues to sort of risk whether they, their relationship with their own constituents to support new things, in this case, which was, support for LGBTQ equality, didn't make any sense if I had not shown them authentic support for the things that were sort of similar in their lives. Like how can you talk about, you can't divorce homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, sexism, misogyny, racism, and pretending to divorce them from each other doesn't do any of us that are
right.
the
They'll divide and
of those
conquer.
things. Yeah.
Bacon's Rebellion.
That.
What are you most proud of in your time serving?
It's funny. It's a thing that most people probably would never have noticed, or maybe don't know how it originated. When I was elected, I had 14 closeted colleagues. About 2 months before I took office, the head of what I called the pink underground, the sort of queer people that ran the Capitol. Every single Capitol in America is like this, including Washington, D.C. The amount of staffers in Capitol buildings that are LGBTQ is wildly disproportionate to the regular population. And it's true of Republican staffers and Democratic staffers. It's true everywhere.
You're talking to a boy working in TV and film, yeah.
Right? It's so true. And so when about 2 months maybe before I took office, a group of this sort of pink underground asked if I would meet with all of them.
They have a meeting?
They had a big meeting. It was in...
Were there candles?
It was at a honky-tonk bar. It was in like Reading, Pennsylvania, at a honky-tonk bar. And I asked why it was there, and it was because most of the people weren't out, and they were scared to be gathering anywhere in or near the Capitol, anywhere around Harrisburg.
More conspicuous.
It was a giant place. It was like a
the industrial cowboy line
one of those.
dancing.
It's exactly that, right?
Cowboy industrial complex, right.
And so I talked about, I knew a lot of the people in the room because I'd been running Equality Pennsylvania, and I'd been lobbying for civil rights bills in the Capitol for probably 5 or 6 years. I talked a little bit about my background. I talked about my campaign, and it turned out the two things that they wanted to talk to me about were, one, my physical safety, which I did not know. I was very dismissive of the time, and I should not have been.
It's like every parent when you come out.
Yeah, my colleagues in the Capitol, my non-elected colleagues in the Capitol, people that worked there every day that were queer, were very nervous about my security. And I was not. And it proved to be a problem in my time in office. I was in a bulletproof vest for a while in office, and I wish I had taken them more seriously at the time. Oh. It just seemed very endearing. It didn't seem real, and it was real. The other thing that they wanted to talk to me about was the closeted electeds. You could create an algorithm. You could probably use ChatGPT to do this, where you can identify closeted elected officials largely based on unique votes. People who vote more anti-women's rights, anti-reproductive rights in Democratic districts, people who are more to the right on equality than all of their other votes, oftentimes we find are closeted. It's one of those. It's that Napoleon thing. It's like being so opposed to something. Yeah, 100%. Like it's closet 101. And at the time,
Closet 101. That should have been the name of this podcast.
There it is.
Damn it.
There's still time.
We're like 15 episodes in.
Next season
we can change it.
And I talked with them. I thought that it was 12 at the time. It turned out to be 14. And what I decided was, out of the 14, I believe 12 of them were sponsors of the anti-LGBTQ bills that were in the House.
Oh, you can out them. That's fine.
And it made me madder than hell. Yeah. It was slightly more Republicans than Democrats, but it was a relatively even split. There were only two that were supporters of the LGBTQ bills that were in the closet. They were both Democrats. And so we decided to meet with them all. I was brand new. I decided to scare the shit out of them all.
Did they know that the others were coming?
I don't know.
Did they know who each other was?
Eventually, yes. Yes.
What an intervention.
What I did is I said, so I don't believe in outing people. We should not believe in outing people. Even if
they're trying to take away your rights?
Outing people doesn't do the thing we want it to.
Okay.
A closeted 15-year-old, when someone's getting chastised for coming out, or when someone gets outed and they lose their job, they lose or whatever, they rarely know the backstory about why that person was outed. All they hear is outed and wrong and
it takes over the story.
Wrong. It does.
Okay.
And outing doesn't do what we want it to do. It might to that person, but it does a really negative thing to our community. It does bad things to our youth.
Okay.
But my colleagues didn't know I feel that way. And so we decided to set up meetings with all of them. And under the time, the auspices of, Jeepers, I'm new, I'd like to get some advice from you. And
you walk in, listen, bitch.
I did. That's exactly how it went. We set up these meetings, and I would walk in. There's an outer office and an inner office. I would meet with their staff. Oh, this is, I'd say hi to everybody. We'd walk into their inner office, and they'd close the door. And before they'd get to their desk, I would say, hey, I'm actually not here for advice. I'm here because you're in the closet, and kids are killing themselves because of your votes. And you would not believe how awful they all handled it. And I'd practiced a line.
The deflection?
The amount of times a couple of them tried to throw me out of their offices. And the line I had practiced was, we can either finish this conversation right here and now, or I can finish it out there louder.
You're good with these sound bites.
It made me mad to have to like even think about that.
But
but that was the line.
You came prepared.
And it worked
I love
every
that.
time. So they would go over and they'd lock their door and they'd give me some shit about like, I'm not blessed to live in the world that you got to grow up in, and I couldn't have come out of it. And some of these were people that were my age. And I'd hear stuff about their rural counties, or I'd hear stuff about their religious backgrounds. And all people are entitled to those things. And queer people can be rural and religious. And so it didn't, being closeted and using the closet to hurt queer people was my issue. And so what I told them all was the same thing. I said, you have 90 days to get off of this and every other anti-LGBTQ bill, or we're going to have this conversation again in a much louder way.
Right.
I never did. I never followed up on any of it. But not only did it work, it overworked. It turned out that the group of them got very nervous that if they dropped off the bills together, it would be obvious who they were. And most of their
colleagues
whipped
everyone else.
They did.
Nice.
And in the fall of 2012,
that's why you left. They're too gay. It's time to move on.
Like I was like, all this, and it was no longer unique. No,
I'm no longer the only gay in the village.
Fall of 2012, and I think the spring of 2013, so many Republicans got off the suite of anti-LGBTQ bills that they weren't even supported enough to work their way through committees anymore.
Fantastic.
And there was these years that it really changed how we were fighting for equality. Now, they hated me because of it, and I didn't. As you can imagine, I didn't care at all. Like
none of the Pennsylvania voters even noticed.
And
right?
and no one to this day ever knows. And I would never out them.
State politics.
State politics.
I want to talk more about state politics, but I'm very excited that you won an Out 100 slot this year. You've won a lot of accolades throughout the years. How do you stay grounded and not just... Do you stay grounded? What are some of the things that you do to try to remember that you're just another person and not like this big gay celebrity that is done with his work?
That's such a funny question.
It's a weird one, I know, but there's something there.
So first and foremost, the thing that I'm quick to remind everybody is that I am not an entertainer. Mm-hmm. I'm always grateful when somebody knows who I am or what I've done, in part because it means they're paying attention to politics or progressive issues, or they care about women's rights or queer rights. Like there's very few people that have any idea of who I am that don't know about the work that I do. And so it's a good bridge to most people, but it also my 10 years in the state house, I made $915 a week. That's not a job that makes you rich. No. I have a disproportionate, or I certainly did then, a disproportionate size social media to the job that I was in. And that lent me a lot of ability to do things that my other colleagues couldn't do, and I am so deeply grateful for that. But I try to spend about a week of every month like camping in the woods.
You disconnect.
That I like people a lot, but when I'm not myself, because of too much interaction, I know how, when, and where to get away. And it took me a long time to do that. In the Capitol, by about my 5th year there, I could be in a hammock in like a grove of trees that nobody knew was there, maybe 10 minutes outside of the Capitol, within minutes of us breaking on the floor. There's a lot of on and off and on and off. And I could in a suit go sneak off somewhere and be in a hammock relaxing. And it took me a while to figure out that that's what I needed. I like people, but I'm often that person that if left to my own devices, I would go out to a bar, I would meet the bartender and a waitress or two, and I would plant myself at the end of the bar. And I don't really want to talk to everybody, but I want to be there. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my personality. Yeah.
The eating alone at a restaurant, good for him.
Like that. Oh, that's so secure, so confident.
Nope, just can't cook.
No.
Where did you go after working for the government? How did you decide where to direct your energies and where to kind of best place the laser beam that is Brian Sims? Right after I left office, I went to a firm, consulting firm, an LGBTQ business consulting firm that really specialized in teaching companies the data around why equality is good for business. Mm-hmm. You translated equality into businessese?
Into industry, yeah. And with some degree of reluctance, I hate, in the same way that I hate that we tie healthcare to employment, I hate that probably the best way to advance equality is to make sure that the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 are on board. We're a country that gives far too much credence to what businesses think, but all 23 of the Fortune 500 companies, for example, in Pennsylvania, have LGBTQ non-discrimination policies long before the state did. And so in many ways, business has been good for us. But now that businesses that are trying to have these approaches to equality and DE&I are under attack, a lot of the work that I do is explaining to companies how having an expansive view of who your customers and your employees and what the communities you serve are is not just good at generating revenue, but it's also good at saving you from loss. And while I don't want those to be the terms with which some people approach equality, if that's what it takes to get a company to maybe change a lawmaker or a legislator's viewpoint on this, I'm okay with it.
Since you're probably my most legal expert so far on this show,
Oh no.
what are the current LGBT hurdles and inequalities we're facing today? What are the bleeding arms?
Yeah. So every single state in the United States and the federal government protect certain categories of people from certain types of discrimination. And we largely know them. They're sort of a part of the fabric, the Americana that we think of. You're protected because of your race, your religion, your nationality, your ethnicity, your disability.
The extra penalty for a hate crime.
Right.
Yeah.
And hate crimes are actually a really good way of talking about this. You know, like there are people that say all crimes are crimes of hate and no crimes are crimes of hate, and neither of those things are true. If you writing Tuesday on someone's garage is different than writing on someone's garage,
Someone
right?
wrote Tuesday on your garage?
Well, no, but I mean, you get where I'm going with
That's
this.
actually how I was bullied in 7th grade.
Tuesday.
They would call me a swan. So that they did. That's meaner.
I mean,
I wish they would have said
I don't know, there's something kind of literary about that.
It's so mean. And then
Seems pretty
they
mean.
could jump around like swans. I'm pretty sure one of them's gay now. It was mean because there's nothing you could do about it. Like the PE coach was like watching them and laughing.
Why? Because they're being swans? It's not about you.
The teacher was in on it.
You know, kids can suck.
They're smart.
Yeah.
So hate crimes.
To answer your question, the most states house these protections in what were originally the ethnic intimidation laws of the 1960s and the early 1970s. And then religious communities felt like they needed to be included. And so suddenly Christianity was was protected alongside sort of race and ethnicity. And so we called those laws the Human Relations Acts. And most Human Relations Acts in the United States do not include sexual orientation or a gender identity, both real or perceived. A kid getting bullied for being gay, if he's actually straight or she is actually straight, should still be protected. Right. That real or perceived language is really important. Barack Obama and Joe Biden did something for queer Americans that we had not seen before in the federal government, and that is that they decided to use the protections afforded at the federal level for civil rights, largely in Title VII, to protect LGBTQ people as well. Not only are those protections going to go away, I believe that federal marriage equality goes away next year, probably,
Really?
I think in June of next year.
And if you're already married?
That's it creates a whole lot of problems. I'm getting married, as we talked about earlier, I'm getting married next week instead of next September when my wedding is actually planned. I'm getting married legally next week because among the things that I think we can best do to protect ourselves before federal marriage equality goes away is to get married in states that have marriage equality, where that marriage equality is either a part of their constitution or where it predates federal marriage equality.
Okay.
Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, New York. We're going to Boston for ours. A lot of people remember that Joe Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act a year and a half ago, which undid the Defense of Marriage Act from Bill Clinton's time in office. And really all this does, after marriage equality goes away, it's going to create a whole slew of different categories of people. Were you married in a state where it was legal, but you are no longer living in a state where it is legal? And are you still married, or vice versa? And then there's all the attendant issues of insurance, of families, of adoption, and all the things that go with,
That's
with
our
being
biggest
married.
concern right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I, in the way that marriage equality was never the be all and end all of LGBTQ civil rights, and I was always frustrated when people felt like it was, almost in reverse, it is a big deal to lose it. It is a canary in a coal mine. This is a bellwether of a sea change in LGBTQ civil rights advancement, and it terrifies me.
So what do we do? The election's over. People are losing interest.
Yeah.
How do we stay activated, engaged, involved?
We do a lot. One of the things that I think we do is we sure as hell start electing better people. The data, and I've seen this bear out in my career in office, but the data shows me that our resources right now are best spent putting people in office who believe in the things that we believe in than trying to change the minds of people who are already in office who don't believe in the things that we believe in. I also know, so I believe that the best public policy is about empathy. And it always sounds really high-minded when I say it, and I don't mean it in that way. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. My last year in office, I voted on 1,000 bills. Of those 1,000 bills, only about 50 ever had or would have any impact on my life. And so I could look at my own life experiences to figure out how to vote on them. 950 bills required me to put myself in somebody else's shoes when I was figuring out how to vote. How will this impact this plant, this person, this neighborhood, this bottom line? And that's what lobbying is. Please think about this community or this other thing when you're making this decision.
At its best.
At its best. Truly at its best. Well, it turns out empathy isn't equally shared by all people in this world. Women, for example, in the United States are statistically significantly more empathetic than men. And there is no biological component to that. It is purely among the many life skills you learn when you are not the catered to class.
Yep.
It's how to read other people, understand other people. It's how to, we talk about code switching like it's a bad thing. In order to code switch, you got to code understand first. And we know it, but we call it coded. We call it women's intuition. We call it black girl magic. We call it trans excellence. And those are all really coded ways of saying if you've had to overcome a lot of shit in your life, you're probably really good at overcoming shit. And those are the people I want making decisions. Not only does the data tell us that electing people who come from marginalized backgrounds mean that they are more likely to focus on other marginalized communities, not even the ones they come from, but we also know that elected bodies that have highest numbers of women in them, for example, are the most functioning democracies in America. The states that have the lowest number of women in their legislatures are often the most defunct legislatures in the country. And so for me, I think we could take a lot of the money that we spend on advocating for racial and ethnic justice, LGBTQ civil rights, women's and reproductive rights, and put it into electing women, electing people of color, electing second-generation immigrants, electing first-generation immigrants in places where we can, electing LGBTQ people. I think we are at a point where the pieces on this board are playing a game.
Okay.
And we need to clear the board.
That's wonderful. I mean, it sucks that we have to even be in this position, but I think that's a really good take.
And it's something that we're really, really capable of doing. There are organizations all across the country that are working really hard to do. I mean, I look at LPAC. I look at Emily's List. There are, Voto Latino. There are organizations that are electing people that we don't have to lobby on equality, that we don't have to teach them about reproductive rights. Right now, I don't know if half of Congress knows what a fallopian tube or an ectopic pregnancy is.
What would you say to a 16-year-old version of yourself today who wants to be in your shoes and be the first openly queer elected member of Eagle River, Alaska? I don't know if they've had one yet. So sorry if you are just an entirely queer assembly up in Alaska. Probably not. But where would you start? In high school, what programs are you involved in? What are you looking to do? Do you have to go to law school? What's the track?
Yeah, I would say focus on almost everything else except for government and law. And I know that sounds a little strange, but in my own experience, when I got to the legislature, you could so deeply tell the difference between those people that just had always wanted to be in the front of the room, always needed to have their opinion heard last, who just knew that they were going to be elected officials. And then the other third of the room, and I came from that third, the other third of the room were people that had issue expertise, who were angry at the way a policy or policies were being handled or not handled. They were there, maybe not reluctantly, but it was not the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Okay. When I left office, people asked me if I think there were people that were concerned if I was okay. And I had to very often say, being a state representative was never, ever in any of my dreams.
Your goal was change.
My goal was change. It did not make a 1 year, a 3 year, a 5 year, a 10-year plan in my life, and I have those things. It was never on them. I want to use the skills that I have, the privileges that I was blessed with. I woke up in this meat sack this morning that's going to promise me a whole bunch of privilege that I did not earn, and the only thing I know to do with that privilege is to break down the systems that perpetuate it, and I get to do that in a lot of ways.
Well, I appreciate you dragging your meat sack all the way over here today. We like to end every show on a low note with a fight. Brian has selected a topic from a list of controversial topics. He has chosen his stance on the topic and whether or not he would like to go first. What are we fighting about?
We are going to fight about youth sports. I do not believe that a parent who knows what they are doing should put their kid in football. Fight me.
So you're arguing against kids in football, and would you like to go first or second?
I would like to go first? All right.
Should you put your kids in football? Fight me.
So obviously, as a product of youth football, high school football, and college football, I believe deeply in the lessons that sports teaches us, but I have seen from all other sports that none of those lessons are unique or universal to football. What football is it's two things. It is the most expensive sport at every single school in every single situation. It pulls resources away from all the other people that might actually get that experience that you say those players are benefiting from. Secondly, it is still consistently the most damn dangerous thing that we allow young people to do, and we treat them like gladiators. We throw a bunch of teenagers, or even worse, little tiny kids, into a setting covered in about 20 to 40 pounds worth of plastic and padding, and we let them throw themselves at each other at rates that would never fly if they weren't padded. And as a result, what do? They break themselves, they break each other, and they have lasting issues that if they're lucky enough, won't haunt them for life, and if they're not, will probably impact the longevity of their lives.
Wow. I can tell you've been thinking about this for quite a long time. Dear sweet Brian, do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? You are asking us to defund football. That's like making apple pie illegal. And when you talk about injuries and leaky brains and parts of spinal fluids coming out of your ears, we have a long tradition of humans, like before we even started writing, of virgin sacrifice. Usually it's girls, sometimes it's boys. This is the boy version. This is an important part of the way that society functions. If we don't let our children kill themselves on each other, God will get mad.
Pugilism.
He will get really, 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 really mad at us, and he's going to start smiting. What is it, smiting?
You don't think that she's already pissed off God?
Pugilism is when God's going to punish you? Is that what that is?
No, pugilism is essentially forcing two people in a pit to fight each other to the death.
Oh. So if pugilism is forcing two people in a pit to fight each other to death, I'm against that too. I think we should stick 12 on each side and make them fight each other to the death, because that's what television is all about. If you don't like it, you're going to just have to leave the country. Fight me.
You know what? We're going to have to agree to disagree.
That's my line.
I know.
Thank you so much for coming on. I learned a lot. I want to have you back on to talk specifically about sports in the future.
You got it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Stuff Every Queer Kid Should Know. This is a Wellness Loud production, produced by Drake Peterson, Cass Falding, Chantilly Twazan, and Jake Wachtel. If you like this show, don't forget to share it with your friends, subscribe on your preferred channel, and give us a 5-star rating. Also, I would like to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreon subscribers. If you're in the credits tier, you will see your name listed in the show notes.